Puerto Rico está bien ca-
Whether it's through some of our favorite songs, meals, or even serving as government leaders,
This is a time that is not okay in our country.
the island of Puerto Rico has contributed a lot to U.S. culture and history. And yet, a 2017 survey found that nearly half of Americans don't even know that Puerto Ricans are also American citizens. But Puerto Rico and the US mainland have a long and complicated relationship. From its colonial history to its fraught present, there's a lot to know about the island today.
What a beach. And say, it looks like we're in time for a fiesta, a big one.
Puerto Rico first became a US territory in 1898 after the US won the Spanish-American War and sovereignty of the island was handed over from Spain to the US.
Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders made their famous charge up the slopes of San Juan Hill.
As a territory, the island is controlled by the US government but is separate from the mainland. In other words, it's not a US state. So why this relationship? Having control over Puerto Rico gave the US a strategic location for a key naval station in the Caribbean. Under this arrangement, Puerto Ricans weren't US citizens, but they were granted US citizenship in 1917. In 1950, President Truman signed a bill which would allow for the island to become a commonwealth if they chose to do so. And in 1951, they did. But what exactly did that mean? Puerto Rico was now able to have its very own constitution, elected governor, legislative branch, and judicial system. And like all American citizens, this meant Puerto Ricans also had to pay federal taxes. But that taxation hasn't come with the same representation. Puerto Rico doesn't have voting power in Congress, and they can't vote in presidential elections. So what say do Puerto Ricans have over their leadership? Residents of the island can elect their own governor, assembly, and senate by a majority vote. But despite this self-governance, the relationship between Puerto Rico and the mainland has resulted in a serious financial crisis for the island. Back in the 50s, the US wanted to boost Puerto Rico's economy by turning it into a manufacturing hub. So they implemented a series of tax breaks to incentivize business on the island. And it worked. People were working, Puerto Rico started making money, and education rates rose. But in 1996, President Clinton signed a law that would phase the tax break out over 10 years. By the early 2000s, Puerto Rico had lost around 30% of its manufacturing jobs, leaving many unemployed. With a population not making much money and thus not paying much in taxes, the government had to borrow more and more to pay for the territory's upkeep. That, paired with the numerous cases of government corruption, drove the island deeper into debt. By 2015, Puerto Rico could not afford to pay its more than $70 billion debt. The island went bankrupt. Meanwhile, more than 40% of Puerto Ricans continued to live in poverty for years. Today, the island is still struggling to recover from repeated natural disasters, which significantly damaged the island's electric grid, roads, and hospital systems. According to the US Government Accountability Office, FEMA set aside $28 billion to help Puerto Rico recover. But the island has only spent a portion of that funding, citing challenges in recovery efforts. The federal government has tried to help in other ways. President Obama signed a bill known as Promesa, which allowed Puerto Rico to restructure its debt in federal court. And in 2022, it completed the largest public debt restructuring in US history. However, the measure has sparked outrage among Puerto Ricans because of its cut to public goods and the power it gives the president. While the island continues to struggle with its recovery efforts, tourism is a huge part of their economy, but waves of newcomers living in Puerto Rico are driving up rents and displacing locals, and many Puerto Ricans end up moving to the mainland in search of opportunity. This is charging up discussions about whether or not Puerto Rico should become a US state. In 2018, Puerto Rico's governor, Ricardo Rosselló, wrote a letter asking President Trump to, quote, abolish this century-old territorial colonialism, end quote.
We don't want to be a territory anymore. We want to be a state.
Trump remained steadfast that Puerto Rico didn't deserve any better treatment from the US government. However, many other US presidents have expressed support for the idea.
I favor statehood for Puerto Rico.
I strongly favor statehood.
The people of Puerto Rico must decide.
But what do the people of Puerto Rico want? They last held a referendum on statehood in 2020, with 52% of the votes in favor and 48% against. Proponents of statehood argue that becoming a state is the only true democratic option, and one of the most effective ways for the island to overcome its debt crisis.
Puerto Rico escogió la estadidad. La voluntad de nuestro pueblo no caduca.
But opponents worry Puerto Rico will lose its identity. Some even argue it should become fully independent instead.
¡Que viva Puerto Rico libre!
Whether or not the island becomes a state is currently up to Congress. While past bills have succeeded in the House of Representatives, they face an uphill battle in the Senate. Today, the future of the island is unknown, but we do know that Puerto Rico, its people, and its rich, beautiful culture have been and always will be woven into the American fabric.